Okay, good. So I'll talk about caritive constructions in Paraguayan Guaraní. Ouch. Okay, seems like I bunkered the PDFizing of the presentation, but never mind. Okay, so a language spoken in the southern part of Paraguay and adjacent areas of Brazil and Argentina, and so a language of the Tupi-Guarani branch of the Tupi family and the largest, so to say, indigenous language of South America, with like a crazy number of speakers by the continent standards, but also surviving for centuries in the situation of intense language contact and bearing many traces of influence from the mostly dominant Paraguayan Spanish. It's a language with a more or less free word order tending towards SVO, but retaining certain orders correlated with its so to say, SOV ancestry. So like we can reconstruct a gradual shift, and in particular, it has postpositions, which would be of some interest to us later. It is also a split intransitivity language, so where we have different sets of agreement markers for so-called active and inactive verbs, and again, it will be of some consequences for the use of the caritive marker. And the substantial part of my talk is based on fieldwork data collected specifically for this project, albeit relying on an earlier superseded version of the questionnaire from native Guarani speaker Juan Garcia Silvera from Villarica. And there are certain tiny peculiarities of Guaireño dialect, but I guess they are not very relevant for caritives proper. And I assume, based on also on many textual data that I have collected over the years, that what I'm going to say is relevant for Paraguayan Guarani as a whole. Actually, the language which falls under the label of Paraguayan Guarani is not doesn't show much very noticeable regional variation. Okay, so the outline of the talk is as follows. So first, we'll deal with some preliminaries like parts of speech, predictive possession, and a little bit on clausal negation. So things that, we need to clear before turning to caritive. I'll then say a couple of words about a couple of constructions which are not caritives proper, but occupy an adjacent semantic space in a way. Then a little bit about the caritive suffix, on which is featured in the construction that we are interested in, and then I'll talk about first, say, adverbial or copredicative caritives, which are formed by means of a caritive and following oblique flagging marker, and then about nominal caritives, which are again involve a caritive marker and then a relativizer. And then I'll talk briefly about caritives in the verbal domain, which by my preliminary count actually account for about half, if not more, for all the textual tokens of the caritive suffix, and what problems such uses pose for our characterization of the caritive. So as you may see, it's an attempt of a language documentation, pure and straightforward, and I don't have any big theoretical claim or deep analysis under my belt, but I think it might be an interesting data point in the context of a typological study. Oh, sorry. Okay, so as I said before, it's a split intransitive language. So we have active verbs and inactive verbs, and what would be labeled in old school grammars adjectives are also like just a semantic subclass of inactive verbs. But a funny thing first noted by Sebastian Nordhoff in his Magistersarbeit is that there's actually very little to no evidence for distinguishing nouns from inactive verbs. So as to say, they look more like, say, semantic actional classes of the same broad category rather than clearly delineated parts of speech. And the key to this is one of the key diagnostics for this is the peculiar construction of predictive possession found all over Guaraní languages, and like actually a little bit beyond the subfamily. So in 1A, you have knife with an inactive marker for first person, for the same set of markers is used on inactive predicates and to encode possession. And in 1B, you have the same form in the construction of predictive possession. So I have a knife. Literally, it's just like my knife. And there, like in the literature on many Guaraní languages, this is analyzed as a kind of existential construction with their zero or covert copula. Like, as for me, my knife exists, and exists is like zero. But I provide several arguments against this for Paraguayan Guaraní. So it's better, like actually, for all purposes, shekese here behaves just as a normal inactive predicate, like so I could say sheshekane o, I am tired, etc. A few examples here. So example 2 is from an oral narrative where the speaker recounts her encounter with a giant anaconda in the forest, and like we are interested in the first two, like in the first 2 or 3 words in the first line. So naingakai ninda huwairi. So it didn't have a head, nor it had a tail, nor it didn't, and it didn't have a tail. Like meaning that the body of the snake just like crossed the road completely and just stretched from one forested area to the other. And here you just have this, like formally you just have these rules for head and tail marked for possession, and then attaching the negative circumfix, and by the way, say hello to the clausal negation. That's how it looks in the language, and it's different from the suffix about which I'm going to talk later. And a similar example from a literary text is in 3. So like I do not have a way. So like the speaker means that like whatever way the situation develops, he's finished. He doesn't have an exit, and it says like again literally, not anymore my road. Okay, now well, just we'll kind of I'm not going to elaborate on this particular construction, but we'll have to kind of revoke it into our memory closer to the end of the talk, when we'll see like similar forms, but with a caritive. Okay, so I would like to say a few words about two constructions, so to say, that like are not do not fall under the established comparative concept of caritive, but might be of some interest. So first is acceptive. So the like the meaning of subtraction from the domain of quantification or some other collective set. So like English accept or Russian kromie. And the thing is that Paraguayan Guarani doesn't have any dedicated lexical or grammatical element to encode this meaning. And the only way is to use a full clause with a clausal negation. So in for, Maimava O, Perunda Ui, so everybody came, Peru didn't come. And it's the only way to express the meaning, like everybody came except Pedro. And the caritive constructions, which kind of we're going to talk below, kind of has not been sort of recruited to well, accommodate those contexts. Okay, and another thing that I would like to mention in passing is that Paraguayan Guarani has a dedicated suffix used to derive transitive verbs from nouns. So from X, you get to deprive of X. And here's again a literary example from a novel. So when soldiers finish their army term, there's a celebration, and here's a quote from the speech of their commander, who said that each one of you will be given a machete so that you could chop your crops and behead communists if you meet them on your way. So this is from a novel that depicts like a time of Stroessnerian and dictatorship. And we have this form peñaca o, so like or better yet peñaca o harwa. So you get like aka or nyaka, its own head, and then this deprivative marker. So like from the root for head, you like derive the verb to behead, to decapitate, and okay, but it's just a kind of derivation which is pretty rare and seems to be very much lexicalized. Now the closer to the so what we are after, and I'm afraid that like I'm not really good, I seem not to be good in keeping time. So 5 minutes left. Yeah, thank you. So there's a dedicated, oh well, not so dedicated actually. So there's a certain suffix which I here label as caritive, and which seems to be reconstructed, like is found in all over the family, and seems to be reconstructed very well for prototypic Guarani stage, with more or less the same primary function. And here in example 6, we have another derivative properly from the same source that testifies to it more autonomous source. So iron, like otherwise, literally if, without, sort of. So like either marry the girl or forget about this village, otherwise ready your coffin. And like we also find this suffix forming antonyms from a number of nouns and verbs. I particularly like the elegance with which the word for order is like the caritive of chaos. And also even maybe some adverbs or lexicalized postpositional phrases So, for instance, here, hendape, like out of place, untoward, atypical. So, from Saint Paul, 2 Corinthians. So, as for me, I will not say anything out of place about myself. And in 10, from a blog post calling for flexibility in school education. So there are children who develop quite normally and children who develop atypically. So you see that hendapete, like quite in their place, and hendapei, caritive after the locative. But I believe that hendape is a very, very much lexicalized, so it shouldn't be like treated as a proper locative form here. And such like antonymic pairs are not so many. It's the suffix in this function is clearly not productive. And since like resulting meanings are highly abstract and belong to religious contexts, it could be just coined for religious, coined by Jesuit missionaries or later language reformers. Like I'm not sure. Okay, so adverbial caritives are marked with suffix for, well, which I can only gloss here as oblique, like really, it covers a number of special, non-special meanings, and it's very hard to pinpoint. So here, one of its alternants made it into Stolz and Friends argumentation from 2006. You see that there's like some similarity between the distribution of Guarani and say Kalmyk and other Mongolic languages. So basically, the good animate companions and reciprocals, they use commutative suffix and dive, like those like instruments and like means and transport vehicles use locative pair, and like those falling in between use recheve, although according to my data, there's a certain degree of variation between speakers, but really it's hard to pinpoint recheve because kind of it has a distribution very typical of an extension of instrumental marker, but for most speakers it doesn't cover like the prototypical situation of working with an instrument. And here are some examples. So Carlos always works without assistance. He returned from the war missing 2 fingers on his right hand. He mounted the bike. Well, okay, let's forget about the bicycle for a moment. So you see this caritive marker and then some like variant of this oblique flag. They're more or less in the free alternation. You cannot use just the caritive form. It just like would not be possible. Probably doesn't mean anything. You like cannot use it. And I don't put many examples here, but I haven't found any restrictions concerning animacy, specificity, topicality, etc. So like you can put more or less like for almost any position in the questionnaire, you can use this ire. And I have to borrow maybe a couple of minutes from the discussion. I'm sorry for that. So here's the nominal caritives, and like they look a little bit like a little bit similar. So we have this caritive marker, then you have relativizer. But what is important is that you also always have the possession marker. So like someone cannot be without like characterized by not having something that is not in their possession. And that's of certain importance because the caritive marker E also functions as a negator for certain types of dependent clauses. I'm not yet even sure, like I cannot sketch the full distribution, but at least for relative clauses, seems to be a variation between caritive and clausal negation. And so in 16, we have, again, the same like the same construction. So there are like children with good heads and children like without good heads. And in 17 we have like a proper relativized verb. So it's a since it's an active verb, it's unambiguously a relative clause negated with the caritive. And you see that the structure is pretty homomorphous, identical. So like those who don't have good heads and those who don't want to learn. And so like we cannot easily disentangle adnominal caritives from just negated relative clauses. Like they look the same. They except that it's like inactive clause of predictive possession that is being relativized. But the structures kind of predict the same superficial appearance. And also there are adverbial clauses that are marked so that are negated with caritive, and some of them are, sorry for the wrong gloss, some of them are actually employ the same oblique marker. So he left with not saying goodbye without saying goodbye. You see, like again, the verb, no markers of nominalization whatsoever, and then caritive and then oblique. So the same string of suffixes that we saw with adverbial markers. Okay, I think I best stop here and deal with the questions, if any.
So your title slide and some of the examples have already produced much admiration from the audience, but maybe we can have a couple of questions. We have 6 minutes for the questions. Please, anyone? Please.
Yes, Dima, thank you so much. I wanted to ask, probably I just missed it a little. So is there any difference in the possibility of clausal or verbal interpretation of the caritive between these uses that you showed last with the relativizer and the previous ones? Yes.
I think like, so is there any difference in the possibility of
clausal interpretation? So here you say that at least superficially it looks like a relativized clause, and the caritive thus can be just analyzed as some sort of, I don't know, subordinate negation or. But in the previous cases without the relativizer, the situation is different.
I think it's like, you know, like for me, it's still a mystery. I haven't set my mind upon it. I'd say that it's kind of not quite as straightforward, because for one, so on the one hand, we definitely have a parallel, because seems like in this, like we have the same marker. Here's oblique, which kind of can attach a wide array of categories and turn them into adjuncts. So it functions as like a sort of, like, say, case marker. It functions as a sort of subordination marker. But then, and like the same parallel works here. So like without someone and not doing something like kind of, say, adnominal or maybe close level modifiers. Both. On the other hand, here, for instance, we don't get any person marker, active or inactive, and that's kind of makes it sort of difficult. And well, actually, there are constructions in Paraguayan Guarani where you can like use a verb, subordinate verb, without a person prefix. But it would be like this is a special context to which I think these constructions do not qualify so easily.
Okay.
Thank you. There is one more question from Adam Sinderman, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I work on a very distantly related language, Tupari, which belongs to the Tupian family's Tuparian branch. So there's a cognate morpheme, just glottal stop, which functions both as a caritive and as sort of the standard negator in Tupari, and it's restricted to nominal bases only. So I was wondering if the highlighted caritive suffix in Paraguayan Guarani, can it ever attach to something that isn't nominal? So I'm just looking at example 11 where you have that nominalizer. Are there any circumstances in the language where you could put the caritive directly on the verb help, or does it always need an intervening nominalizer?
Okay. Thing is, yes, you can, because like look at this, for instance, example 17. So those who don't want to study. Thing is that we have a sort of nominalizer here, but it's not intervening. It's above the caritive. And the same, or not quite the same here. So there's a caritive and then the oblique marker, which like we believe has nominal origins, but there's no any avert nominalizer here.
Okay.
So in that sense, yes, and that's like really interesting because like I'm still thinking about how to account for it syntactically. Yeah, but there's definitely a process of so yeah, I've seen in some Tupari examples. There's definitely a process of extension of the erstwhile proto-language caritive in some Tupi-Guarani languages into the verbal domain. So in many cases, it's like the main marker, like the only marker for all types of subordinate clauses. And it seems like it could be connected to the fact that like these subordinate clauses started as nominalizations, but when were gradually finitized, but retained the marker, something like that.
Cool,
But,
thank you very much.
So I think that in Paraguayan Guarani, this process has not been as drastic as in some other languages.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Maxim, you will have to have you follow up privately. We have to proceed to another speaker.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dima.